Sometimes the most revealing moments happen when nobody expects them. For nearly 2 weeks, viewers of Live with Kelly&Mark had gotten used to something unusual, a rotating cast of familiar faces sitting in Ripa's chair, while Mark Consuelos carried the show on his own. And then on August 10th something shifted. Kelly appeared back on screen beside her husband. To the casual viewer it looked like a homecoming. But if you looked closer there was a quiet twist tucked underneath that return. One that says a lot about how this couple handles the unexpected both on camera and off. Because here's the thing. That episode wasn't actually live. It had been recorded earlier before Kelly's break even began. Which means the return audiences were watching wasn't really happening in real time at all. It was a piece of the past, arriving at exactly the moment fans needed to see her face again. There's something strangely moving about that. A woman recovering behind the scenes, unable to speak comfortably, unable to be in front of a live audience. And yet, through the magic of pre-production, she still showed up for her viewers when they needed a familiar presence the most. It wasn't real time. But emotionally, for a lot of people watching, it felt real anyway. So let's rewind for a second because the why behind all of this matters more than the headline. Kelly had been away from the show since late July, recovering from a gum graft surgery. Anyone who's been through dental surgery knows it's no small thing, and by Mark's own account on the show, this one hurt more than most. He described her as being on a liquid diet, unable to speak much, unable to even pull her own lip down without pain. For a woman whose entire career is built on quick wit and rapid-fire banter, that kind of physical restriction is almost ironic. The voice that carries a daytime talk show, silenced by recovery. And what did Mark do in her absence? He didn't disappear into awkward silence or coast through the weeks. He leaned into it, almost like a man determined to prove he could hold the fort. Week after week, a new co-host sat beside him. Kevin Jonas, Mila Kunis, Pamela Adlon, Scott Foley, later Sarah Chalke, Jenna Dewan, even the show's own in-house DJ stepping in for a day. It became something of its own storyline. Not Kelly's show without Kelly, but watch Mark navigate this with whoever walks through that door. That's worth sitting with for a second because it says something about how television chemistry actually works. A show like this depends on rhythm, on two people who know each other's timing so well that a raised eyebrow can land a joke without a single word. Suddenly, Mark had to recreate that rhythm from scratch multiple times with people he'd never sat across from in that exact format. And by most accounts he pulled it off. There's a particular kind of confidence that comes from being tested in front of millions of people every single morning, without your usual scene partner. Whatever else people say about Mark Consuelos, those weeks showed a man capable of holding a room on his own. But underneath the professionalism, there was clearly something more personal happening. Because this wasn't just a colleague taking sick leave. This was his wife. The person he built a family with, the person he's been building a life alongside since they met on a soap opera set decades ago. Every guest host segment, every joke he cracked to keep the show moving, was happening while his actual home life had a slightly different rhythm too. A spouse recovering, careful not to laugh too hard, trying not to talk more than she should. It's easy to forget, watching two people banter on a morning show, that their on-screen chemistry is really just an extension of their real one. When Kelly's away, audiences notice the absence not because the show falls apart, but because something specific disappears, that unmistakable sense of two people who actually like being around each other. You can't manufacture that. You can bring in wonderful guest hosts and the show can still be funny, still be watchable, but there's a difference between watching two colleagues do their jobs well and watching two people who've spent 30 years choosing each other, every single day in front of cameras and away from them. That's probably why her return, even a pre-recorded one, meant so much to people. It wasn't really about the format. It was about seeing that dynamic restored, even in a small, delayed way. And then there's the layer most viewers might not think about right away, what it says about trust. Mark didn't try to hide the fact that Kelly was struggling. He talked about it openly, almost self-deprecatingly, joking that she famously doesn't feel pain, and normally skips Novocaine at the dentist, but that this one had actually gotten to her. That kind of honesty on live television isn't nothing. A lot of public figures would smooth over a spouse's health issue with vague statements. Instead, he chose specificity, a little humor, a little vulnerability, the exact combination that tends to make audiences feel like they're being led into something real rather than handed a press release. There's a pattern here if you trace their years on air together. Kelly and Mark's entire on-screen story has been built on this kind of transparency. Long before he became her permanent co-host, replacing Ryan Seacrest, audiences already knew about their marriage, their kids, their inside jokes, their disagreements. When Consuelos stepped into that role permanently, Some viewers openly wondered whether a real-life married couple hosting a morning show together would feel too intimate, maybe even uncomfortable to watch. But what actually happened was almost the opposite. Audiences leaned in. Because the appeal was never just watching two skilled hosts trade banter. It was watching an actual marriage play out its ordinary rhythms in an extraordinary setting. That's probably the deeper reason this particular story landed the way it did. It's not really a story about a pre-recorded broadcast or a scheduling quirk. It's a story about what happens to a partnership when one half of it has to step back, and the other half has to figure out how to keep things standing without leaning on the person they usually lean on most. Some fans wondered whether Mark seemed a little more subdued during his solo weeks, missing his usual rhythm. Others thought he seemed almost energized by the challenge, like someone rising to an occasion he didn't ask for but wasn't going to shrink from either. Both interpretations might be true at once. That's often how real emotion works. It's rarely just one thing. And when Kelly's face did appear again, even in a pre-taped episode, viewers weren't just reacting to a broadcasting technicality. They were reacting to relief, to familiarity, to the small human comfort of seeing two people who belong together again, even if the timeline behind the scenes was a little more complicated than it appeared. There's something almost poetic about a woman who lost her voice, in the most literal sense, still finding a way to be present for an audience that missed her. It says something about the nature of connection in the media age. That presence doesn't always require perfect timing. Sometimes it just requires showing up, even delayed, even quietly, even through a screen recorded days earlier. As Kelly continues her recovery and the show works through a stretch of pre-recorded episodes before things fully return to their normal live rhythm, there's a broader lesson sitting quietly underneath all of this. Long marriages, long partnerships, long working relationships, they're rarely tested by the big, dramatic moments people expect. They're tested by the smaller, unglamorous stretches. A surgery recovery. A few weeks of solo hosting. A husband cracking jokes to keep a show moving while quietly checking in on his wife between segments. Perhaps the reason so many people remain invested in Kelly and Mark isn't simply because they've spent decades in the spotlight together. It's because audiences keep catching these small, unscripted glimpses of two people actually showing up for each other, even when the format gets complicated, even when the timing gets strange, even when one of them literally can't speak. And maybe that's why moments like this stay with viewers long after the cameras stop rolling. What did you think when you first saw Kelly back on screen? Did you notice she seemed different, more careful with her words? And what did you make of Mark carrying those weeks solo? Did he surprise you? Drop your thoughts below, and let us know which guest host you thought held their own best beside him. Sometimes the smallest moments end up telling us the most about the people we've been watching for years.